My name is Fedor Blaščák. I am the director of the Open Society Foundation Bratislava. I will be the moderator of the panel, and it's my pleasure to have here guests. First, Martin Poliačik, former MP, now the vice director,
deputy director
of the Globsec office in Kiev. Next to him, Michailo Glubokij, the development director of the cultural NGO Izolaytsia. It's a cultural center, or it was cultural center in Donetsk. It bears the name Izolaytsia because it was in the industrial building, which was a production factory for the isolation. So it's a material meaning of the word, not the abstract one. Welcome, Michailo. Michailo is now based in Bratislava, and he's very active and one of the prominent leading figure in the Ukrainian cultural scene. And the third one is Alexander Duleba. There is no need to introduce him, a biggest expert on Russia and Ukraine, by now an advisor to the Prime Minister of Slovak Republic, a man responsible for many, who is heading many cooperation projects between Slovak government, Slovak Republic, and the Ukraine. And it's my honor to have here online Oleksandra Matvijčuk from the Center of Civic Liberties. It's an NGO from Kiev. You might know her from last year when there were three NGOs, Belarusian, Russian, and Ukrainian, who were awarded with Nobel Prize for Peace. Hi, Oleksandra, are you there?
Hello.
Hello. So we are going to discuss an issue which we called as a new partnership, the role of the Slovak NGO sector in the reconstruction of Ukraine. But since the quite heterogeneous composition of the panelists, we will talk also about the political context, about the initiatives that are on the table right now regarding the international community, not only the Slovak Republic. We will talk about less traditional actors in this field, which are cultural institutions. That's Michailo's task to do, and Martin will tell us his insights, which he has actual insights from Kiev. But my first question is to Alexandra, who is now in Canada, by the way. And of course, congratulations to the big award and to the big credit you got from the world community and your organization last year in December. But my first question is a very easy and personal one. What comes top of your mind when you hear when we say a word Slovakia or Slovak NGOs? Is it so that the reputation of the country now in Kiev, or there is a certain buzz in Ukraine civic sector about the Slovakia and Slovak civic society?
When I hear the words Slovak civil society, the main association is solidarity and freedom, because this is two categories which characterize civil society in general. And ability to express solidarity and support people who are fighting for freedom is very natural for people who take additional responsibility to their shoulders to provide transformation of their own country, or to solve some complex strategic problems, or to help some vulnerable groups in their own country. And in this war, which Russia started against Ukraine, we are, as Ukrainians, fighting for freedom in all senses. For a freedom to be an independent state, but not Russian colony. For a freedom to preserve our Ukrainian identity and not to be forced to educate Ukrainian children as Russians. And for a freedom to have our democratic choice. Just a chance to build the country where the rights of everybody are protected. And these goals are very understandable for Slovak civil society, and that is why I have such main associations.
Yes, thank you. So now I will hold on the issue, but maybe to frame the debate and goals, maybe my intention is to name and to identify the ways and manners in which Slovak NGOs could cooperate with Ukraine NGOs. I would say it directly that in my view Ukraine is our new destiny, that we haven't been thinking about leaning eastwards some years ago, but that has changed substantially since the war started, and we should realize that not only helping to help the Ukraine and Ukrainians in Slovakia is our moral obligation, but there are some also strategic tasks that can follow up from that new situation. So this is what I want to discuss now, and namely to start with how our experience from the 90s, from the pre-accession process to the EU can be useful to the Ukrainian civil society. Oleksandra, you've been there at that time already on the scene. So what do you think? How can Slovak NGOs specifically focus on that field of help and political contribution?
Okay, thank you for inviting me, for having me here. I'm not going back to 1998 in Slovakia because personally I was, I voluntarily, so I declared my interest to be a member of the election commission in Slovakia because it's very important to control and to prevent misuse of parliamentary elections in October. And this was a really huge mobilization of Slovak civil society, and not only civil society, but all Slovakia. And then, it resulted into the sort of the change of domestic politics, foreign policy, our Euro-Atlantic aspirations, and Slovakia was a very interesting example of how you can mobilize the whole society if you have a shared vision how the society should look like. And I think so. This is interesting experience, and I think that the Slovak think tanks, NGOs on different level of the public administrations, because you have think tanks that do now economic analysis or foreign policy, whatever. Then you have think tanks that do, focus on public administration reforms. All the parts on sort of the sectoral policies, or sectoral reforms you have to implement in order to simply modernize your country. So here, yes, Slovakia has some capacity to be shared, and it was shared already with some our partners from the Western Balkan countries, and the process still going on. The government supporting the process. We have the Slovak Aid Agency, which supports projects implemented by Slovak NGOs in the Western Balkan countries. Partly also, we have the projects implemented by Slovak NGOs in Ukraine, but of course now they're focused on humanitarian assistance to Ukraine, so this is the focus, but it should change. To support Slovak NGOs, to be active in those sectoral and to assist Ukrainian partners in sectoral reforms, self-government, whatever. Starting from agriculture, healthcare system, whatever, So I see a huge potential here. So let me just add, so I'm advising our Prime Minister, and last year, Prime Minister, so we initiated a roundtable with the umbrella association of Slovak businesses, but also NGOs were presented there, and invited all the entities in Slovakia to share their vision, how they want to contribute to the recovery of Ukraine. And so far we got bids from 22 Slovak NGOs, mostly businesses. So presented their the services, goods they are ready to deliver and cooperate with Ukrainian partners. We got more than, we had 321 bids of Slovak entities, mostly businesses, almost 280, then 22 NGOs, and then also some public authorities like the specialized regulatory agencies, which will be very important in terms to assist Ukraine in implementing the accession agreement to the European Union. So I believe that this will be the case. So yes, but it should be organized. It should be organized. So far we are focused on humanitarian assistance, that's as a natural because the war is going on still, but still we have to start to think how to organize the involvement of Slovak NGOs, in partnership with Ukrainian NGOs to assist Ukraine. And I will maybe stop my presentation, but the last word here, what I see as a huge potential, which is already right now, but I do not think any sort of the positive moves or shifts or initiatives from NGOs, from Ukraine, but also from international partners. And this is a debate on the recovery plan for Ukraine. Because we have on the table only the first version of the recovery plan presented by Prime Minister Šmihal last year in July in Lugano, at the Lugano conference, and that's it. But if you will look in details, so you can see that there's many issues that should be still debated. We have actually took for the international community almost 8 months to agree on the governance system, how to manage recovery process. Steering committee, operational delivery platform, secretariat, whatever. It was really very tough. There were tough, debates, because the EU had a sort of the EU-centric vision how to manage that, but then other countries, future donors will say, okay, we also want to be a part of the management process. But nevertheless, so all the time when war started, we have been having debate on the governance, but not on the substance here. And I think that what was proposed by the Ukrainian government, so 24 sectoral areas for the reconstruction of Ukraine, we need really serious and substantial debate about the reforms, how the process of recovery will be organized, what norm standards will be used, because actually, so we have the assistance coming from the EU members or European other countries that are ready to assist. It's going on, like Bucha. I was twice during the war in Bucha. First one on 8th of April last year. It was really a short time after Russian troops simply withdrew from the area. It was fully destroyed. I never, forget. I mean, so I will simply have those pictures, in my memory forever until my time on this sort of in this life. But I visited again Bucha again on 31st of March this year, and I was shocked, but in positive terms. My impression was that I'm visiting Burgenland, we're seeing some Austrian small city, reconstructed buildings, roads, everything, And, so this is the process is going on, but the question is, what standards were applied to reconstruct those buildings, et cetera, et cetera. So, I mean, it's going like in a chaotic way, and I'm missing our sort of organized initiative of the civil society, not only from Slovakia, but it should be debated, internationally, how to make it a part of the process, and especially now I see the momentum when the civil society should be a part in order to debate the plan, how to reconstruct Ukraine.
Okay, so there are like many issues. Alexandra, I will get back to you, and then guys, you here, but I want to ask you, because you are okay now in Canada, but you are in Kiev, so you are following the political discourse on domestic politics in Kiev. Of course, the war is the main issue. But when we are talking about the integration, the EU integration processes, we remember in Slovakia after '98, which was the turning point in the political and in the modern history of Slovakia, because the Mečiar was defeated. From that point, there was a huge initiative and a joint forces of government and civic sector with a clear goal. Shared goal to integrate the country into EU. Is that motive, is that urge now present in Ukrainian politics, Alexandra?
I must admit that this war has a value dimension, and this war started not in February 22, but in February 2014, when Ukraine obtained the chance for the quick democratic transformation in order to accelerate the process of joining to European Union. And in order to stop us on this way, Putin started this war of aggression, occupied Crimea and part of Lugansk and Donetsk region, and last year he expanded this war to large-scale invasion. And in this regard, this is not just a war between two states, Russia and Ukraine, this is a war between two systems, authoritarianism and democracy. And that is why Ukrainians, for all 8 years before large-scale invasion and even after large-scale invasion started, have no luxury to concentrate only to defend our country, our people, and our democratic choice. Parallel, we have to continue our path to the EU, and which means that we have to demonstrate success on the way of democratic transformation. And this is something which is very understandable on the level of Ukrainian authorities and I must admit, level of Ukrainian citizens as well, because when all Ukrainian poll was conducted and Ukrainians was asked, what do you think, whether or not we have to join to EU without success of democratic reforms, like vast majority of citizens told very clearly that we need and must to provide democratic reforms and show the success in the building of democratic institutions, because it's something which is done for us as people who live there. Because 9 years ago, during Revolution of Dignity, we are fighting for a chance to build a country where the government is accountable, judiciary is independent, and police do not beat students who are peacefully demonstrating. And that is why, there is a common understanding that, yes, it's very difficult to provide democratic reforms during the peaceful time, and extremely difficult to make democratic reforms during large-scale invasion. But we have no other time, just this, which we have for today, and that is why we have go on.
Yeah, you said that it's a war between two systems. There is a European Union on one side, which is and Russia on the second, and Ukraine is in a sort of a gray zone basically now, because Ukraine is not in the EU, and the EU, when I remember 20 years ago, for us, it was a quite vague image of what it means to what are the EU funds. How, all these things were brand new, and we had some illusions about that, and there were many NGOs from the West and the consultant companies coming from the West to teach us basically and to explain how it functions. So. Michailo, in your view, the people in Ukrainian civic sector in Kiev, in the NGOs, are they now competent and familiar with the structural scope of EU support, or how would you assess the situation? Because to me, I have to admit, what came out of it in praxis was quite different to our dreams before the integration, and there was a FARE fund, which was basically an elementary school for the NGOs to get to know the basic processes, but there is no FARE fund so far in Ukraine. So how would you assess this situation and maybe the mindset of the leaders of the civic sector in Ukraine regarding the integration processes, and also some practical issues like EU projects, EU funds?
Well, I think there are two things to talk about. First of all, is that Ukraine have been actively integrating into European Union and cooperation with European Commission funds different organizations from the Union from 2014, even earlier from 2003 when Orange Revolution happened, and before Yanukovych took over the power, there was also a similar process going on, right? There was a big attempt of European Union to start integration, to educate people. There's a lot of really famous Ukrainian curators, if we are speaking about culture, arts and culture, who got their education somewhere in 2004 with the help of big European program that became, like Tatiana Filevska, for example, she is deputy director of Ukrainian Institute. And lots of them became really prominent figures in Ukrainian civil society and different cultural organizations, but not only cultural, of course. So there's a lot of organizations that already have this experience or went through these educational processes and quite deeply integrated into, not all of course, but some of the funds and processes. And as an example, I might tell you that we, Izolaytsia, together with actually Slovak organization Mali Berlin from Trnava, will be implementing program of Creative Europe to support Ukrainian cultural organizations and present them in Creative Europe countries. And this was a huge program, €2 million, and we competed with Goethe Institute, UNESCO, lots of different really famous and really competitive organizations from European Union, and we won. We are going to implement this program. So, I mean, this shows competencies that at least some of us have. But then, of course, it's important to say that, all the structures, all the system that exists in European Union is really strong and really complicated and really complex, and depending on the sphere and on the topic of interest, there are different NGOs that knows much better than what we know about culture, for example. So I think it's natural that this knowledge is divided between different organizations that are professional in their own directions. And of course, if we are going to speak about small organizations, young organizations, emerging organizations, they don't have the whole spectrum of knowledge, but still there is a lot of capacity in Ukrainian NGOs to cooperate with EU and EU funds.
And what would you say is the comparative advantage of the Slovak NGOs in this field, if there are any?
You mean in comparison
because you
to
can
Ukraine?
bypass Slovakia, and you can talking about EU, is talking about Sweden, is talking about 27 countries. So what would you identify as a comparative advantage of the Slovak?
Yeah, we started to work with Mali Berlin, I know maybe 4 years ago, 5 years ago, in different projects, and we started to develop a program of integration of Eastern European cultural organizations with Central European cultural organizations. And for me it was really important because whenever we were trying to organize Eastern European or organizations from Eastern Partnership together, they would go through this process of coming back to this old colonial Russian past. They would let's speak Russian. Everyone here speaks Russian. Let's speak Russian. Or they would refer to some cultural references that everyone knows. Like, have you seen this Soviet movie? Of course, haha. And this was quite hard for me because, for example, I wanted to build a new future. Not that does not refers itself against Soviet legacy. So for us, Slovak organizations became this gateway into Central Europe, into cooperation with other countries from the region, because Slovakia and people in Slovakia are really similar to us. Language is pretty similar. We share similar values, and it's really easy for us to talk to each other to understand how we work, and even this work ethics really similar. Whenever we are working together, we know each other. Our meetings are really quick, unlike meetings with some Western European organizations. Yeah, so this easiness and accessibility has really key role in cooperation.
Thank you. Martin, you are here now as a deputy director of the Globsec office in Kiev, which is basically a pioneer of Slovak NGO, because you have established the office already there, which is a big difference regarding the strategic partnerships with the Ukrainian partners. What are your impressions and actual impressions from you are there a couple of months? Is it necessary for the Slovak people to go there? So when we are talking about strategic partnership, we are talking about establishing offices in Ukraine. Is this the right way, or what would be your practical advice to the people here and who are following our debate?
Yeah. I believe it's absolutely necessary to go and see and meet the people there and to fall in love with Ukraine, because that's what happens when you go there. Globsec was the first international organization that started a new office since the beginning of the full-scale war in October last year. And I asked for the job to work there, and I started in January. And to summarize what I love about Ukrainians, I will quote one man that I met. He's a representative of LGBTI military group. So those are LGBTI people fighting in the army with their own unicorn patches. And when he was talking to me, the final sentence said it all. He said, "Few years ago, I wanted to join the European Union because I wanted the Ukrainian people to be like you. But now I want to join the European Union because I want the European people be like us." So that's the level of self-confidence and what they think they can bring to the rest of the world. And of course, it's not among everyone. There are still people living their normal lives and a lot of trouble in Ukraine. But I think that one thing that needs to be, it's somehow connected to what Sasha was talking about the local aspect, about the local aspect of the reconstruction process, because a lot of Western companies and a lot of Western partners are just waiting to go and build. But in many places there's no need. There are already the materials, there are already the people, there are already the technologies that they need to rebuild the country. All they need is support and money. And the local aspect of reconstruction is a really vital part of what needs to be talked about, not only at the reconstruction conference now in London, but also with private companies that are eager to help, but they first need to understand the environment and what is actually the potential of the Ukrainians to rebuild the country themselves. Another thing is that there's a very harsh lesson that we have learned in Slovakia, and Ukraine can learn from us, and that is that reforms cannot only be in economy and social system and in numbers and Excel sheets. Reforms need to go deep into what does it mean to be human. And we didn't do it in Slovakia, and we are paying this price now with the lowest level of trust between people, with the society very eager to eat any hoax or disinformation that's coming our way. And when I talk about Ukraine, I usually talk about a potential of a quantum leap, because so many factors are moving in the same time that they can really move to a completely new level of existence. But for that, they need help. And it's not only help in building the buildings and institutions and democratic principles of the society, but also dealing with the mental health, dealing with the social cohesion of the society, dealing with the new levels of trust that need to be built up between people that move to a completely different part of the country, because we are only seeing, people who left Ukraine, but there are a lot of IDPs, internationally displaced people, who are who used to live in, let's say, Luhansk and now are living in Zaporozhye, in Uzhhorod or in Lviv. So everything is moving, and one thing that we can actually help is to point towards very simple human things that need to be dealt with in order for the later reforms to be successful.
Yeah, I get your point. Thank you, Oleksandra. Maybe to focus more on that. Your domain is a rule of law as an NGO. Could you maybe identify domains where a potential know-how transfer from Slovak NGOs, which let's think about some anti-corruption reforms or maybe some reforms of the juridical system. Do you see any specific domains that are good adepts for the transfer of know-how between Slovakia and Ukraine?
I think that
I don't think. Sorry. I don't have in mind only a one way from Slovakia to Ukraine, but the two way. Like from Ukraine to Slovakia as well.
I think that we are lacking the deep discussions organized jointly by a representative of civil society of Slovak NGOs and Ukrainian NGOs. And in such discussion, we can much more easier identify such areas and build these mutual channels of transferring knowledge. But I also want to emphasize for what the previous speaker was told about the challenges which accompany the process of reform. What do I mean? To establish a well-developed democracy is not enough to adopt qualities laws and build new formal institutions. The non-formal values of society, always much more stronger, which mean that we have parallel always to work with society and with its values. And we need enlightenment campaign to demonstrate, to convince people that rule of law is much more effective than corruption and other kind of solving problems. And this is something which is not unique just for Ukraine, but for all nations in transit. Because human rights, it's not just norms of conventions and declarations. In some specific mindset is a way how people are looking to the world, and this way define their decision and their behavior. And that is why this is so crucial task. And now Ukraine in large-scale invasion, and you can clearly understand that how difficult to speak about humanism, about other kind of thing in such very traumatized society. But it's something which has to be done because we have to, even during the large-scale invasion, to save this frame which provide energy of these qualities, laws, and formal institution to work properly in the right direction. And I think that one fuel to this enlightenment campaign has to have a very materialized format, and this fuel is called justice. Because now Putin tried to convince the whole world, not just Ukrainian, that democracy, rule of law, and human rights are fake values. Because during the war, they couldn't protect you. And this is very visible now in Ukraine, because Russians commit horrible atrocities, and they caused enormous amount of human pain to people. And the entire international system of peace and security can't stop this. Recently, Russians exploded the Kakhovska power plant, and the Kherson region was flooded. And this is not just horrible war crimes, but also humanitarian, economical, and ecological catastrophe. So we, just to respond to this claim that rule of law is not fake values, it's effective instrument, we have not just to quote some norms from conventions and declaration. We must demonstrate something materialized, and this is something is justice. We have to punish all Russians who committed these crimes by their own hands, as well as Putin and top political leadership and high military command. They have to be brought to justice.
In this respect, there were some Slovak forensic teams, as I remember. Do you think, Oleksandra, that for that goal, there is possible some foreign input, or is this a question, a problem that the Ukrainian society, civil society, must deal with by itself?
We can't deal it by itself. I will explain briefly the problem which we face. This problem is called accountability gap, and this gap has two dimensions. First dimension is that there is no court in the world which can prosecute Putin and its surrounding for the crime of aggression. Even International Criminal Court has no jurisdiction over the crime of aggression in situation of Russian war against Ukraine. But all these atrocities which we now documented, it's a result of leadership decision to initiate and to start this war of aggression. And we have to put the war of aggression into legal ban, which means that we have to establish a special court on aggression and hold Putin, Lukashenko, and other guilty in this crime accountable. But second dimension is also very difficult to solve. It's dimension connected with those facts that Russia uses war crimes as the methods of warfare. Russia attempts to break people resistance and occupy Ukraine by the tool which I call the immense pain on civilian population. And they provided enormous amount of war crimes. Only our initiative, Tribunal for Putin initiative, for 1 year of large-scale invasion, documented more than 41,000 episodes of war crimes. 41,000. Office of General Prosecutors opened officially 92,000 criminal proceedings. Like, can you imagine how you can effectively investigate and prosecute 92,000 effective proceedings? It's impossible even for the best national system in the world, and Ukraine is not the best national system in the world. There are a lot of homework which has to be done. So we need international assistance in the form of practical involvement into the level of national investigation and national justice, like a model where national prosecutors work together with international prosecutors, national judges work together with international judges. Like, we have to provide justice for all people affected by this war, not just for those who will be lucky to be selected by International Criminal Court.
Thank you. A small question. Michailo and maybe Martin, what is your explanation for the fact that President Zelensky didn't sign the law defining the war crimes, if I'm right? Why is it so? That's quite in contrary to that position from. Because to me it comes like a ultimate condition for follow-up of these activities Oleksandra is talking about. So why is it so that President Zelensky didn't sign the law defining the war crimes?
Well, I don't see his head, so I don't know what the reason is, but I can see. For example, if you look at the report from what was this Amnesty International last year, they were trying to be objective. So they said there are war crimes on one side and war crimes on the other, which is true. It's absolutely impossible that there are no war crimes committed on the Ukraine side of the front line, but the ratio is just so one-sided that you can't be objective when you're talking about what's happening on the battlefield. But probably if the Ukrainians see that once you start talking about war crimes, the international bodies are always trying to look both ways, they might be sort of, trying to protect the people at the battlefield. And I know that a lot of investigation is also happening on the Ukrainian side of their own people. So if they get a video of something that is not right happening with the prisoners of war or something, they are themselves investigating. When you go into the prison camps of the Russian soldiers, they invite international observers, they invite the Red Cross, they treat them with dignity, and they actually work with the Russian prisoners in order to gain information by being friendly and human, because that's not something they are used to. So I don't know what the reason on the level of President Zelensky is, but I see the practice, because we were invited to some of these camps of the Russian prisoners, and they are treated very well by the Ukrainian side. So, of course, when we look at it from the international side, we would like to see the ratification of ICC in Ukraine. We would like to see the signature of Mr. Zelensky on this law, but that still is only the very surface of the problem. What we actually need, and I believe what Oleksandra is very rightly talking about, is we need a total reform of the international environment when it comes to dealing with injustice. It's impossible that the United Nations on a day like this is celebrating the day of Russian language like 2 or 3 days ago. It's absurd that Russia is actually presiding the Security Council. It's absurd. Can't be happening. So we not only need rule of law in a meaning that we need to apply the international law on what is happening in Ukraine. No, we need to redefine the law, the international law, in order to make they call it fair justice in Ukraine. And that means reform of the international institutions like the United Nations, reform of international institutions like happened in the Council of Europe when I was there. And when you're, for example, asking how Slovakia can be helpful in Ukraine when it comes to their local laws, we have perfect anti-corruption laws that are not working because the execution is not there. And this is something that the Ukrainians will need to learn very fast, because they tend to come up with perfect laws and pass them through parliament very fast in order to fulfill all the obligations they need to enter NATO or European Union. But those laws need to work then. They need to be applied. They need to be executed in order for the reform of the society to actually work. And this is something that many people from Slovakia can be very helpful in, because they can say how you need to strengthen your institution, how you need to work with your government and with your people and NGOs and the civic society in order for the new legislative system be properly put into practice between the people.
No, I just wanted to say that I'm not a lawyer, so it's hard for me to comment on these things. From what I know, and we've been working together with Oleksandra, well, mostly, of course, Center for Civil Libraries, but we also try to help to work with this law about war crimes. And I don't know what's the reason right now, and probably some political stuff, but we also know when we were talking to Attorney General, for example, that there are mechanisms that they still use. There are other laws that they apply at the moment, so it's also a thing that the process is not blocked by this. There is still persecution going on.
Alexander, when you hear this and listen to these issues, justice as a primary a common ground for for all the rest of the sectoral politics. So is this does it belong to the top agenda of bilateral or multilateral political negotiations? So when you are present there with the Ukrainian partners, or
Frankly,
is this more like an NGO topic which we discuss here?
Frankly speaking, so I'm in all this intergovernmental dialogue. So I've been a part of it over the last 2 years. It was about first. So we drafted the strategy, how to support Ukraine, and I'm really happy that the former Prime Minister Heger he was eager simply to do something, in us bilateral relations. He invited me to work for him. I drafted the strategy how to upgrade bilateral relations. And I think, so just very briefly, so 3 packages. First, the support for European integration. We identified 8 the most problematic sort of the chapters of the association agreement. And we identified that Slovak capacities. We agreed 8 sectoral agreements on cooperation in order to assist Ukrainian institutions to approximate with the EU legal norms and building institutions, okay? It was already so negotiated. Deadline was the end of February 22, and then Mr. Putin decided to stop our sort of, restart of the bilateral relations, plus then the reform of the intergovernmental commissions. We have 4 of them, and finally the cross-border cooperation, because really there is a huge potential which is not used by local and regional authorities, so the government should play some role. War started. Our next task was to start military assistance to Ukraine, humanitarian assistance to Ukraine, and plus in addition, the Slovak government did a lot to support decision of the EU on granting candidacy status for Ukraine. Heger was the first leader of the EU member states who put on the table of the Versailles summit. It was the first informal summit of the EU leaders after the war started on the 10 of 11 of March with the plan how to manage integration of Ukraine, because this was a shift in geopolitical sort of the paradigm. Now it was not like the former sort of previous arguments that it's their homework. The Ukrainians should approximate with the norms, with the institutions. And so if you will done your homework, then let's have a have a deal on integration. But the argument was it's our homework now. And because of those arguments which were raised by Oleksandra, and what is at the stake by this war for all of us? It's our war. It's really the war between the systems. It's about the war, how we will live in Slovakia, what shape will be, our national budgets will be having. Either we will, invest into defense and militarization, preparing ourselves, for a war with Russia, or we will do what we can in order to support Ukraine. And this was, Heger had 2 rounds of the personal talks with all the EU leaders after the march, because only like 10 countries from the very beginning declared their support for that. But having this complex structure within the European Union, Poland was very eager to help, but because of the rule of law problems, the Poland, they are member states. They do not want to have, to speak with Poles, on the issues of European integration of Ukraine, etc., etc. Spain, Portugal, they have a completely different focus. They are not so much interested, in sort of Eastern Europe, and so on and so on. Nevertheless, Heger did it, 2 rounds of the talks. In the end, so we prepared the argumentation, so we put a list of all those arguments of skeptics who were against positive decision, and we worked with that, and finally, so it was a really, something, the contribution of Slovakia to the positive outcome of this council meeting in June last year with the grant. Then we focused on recovery, etc., etc. Recovery, military assistance, humanitarian assistance, winterization, because this was an issue, the last autumn, because, following the massive missile attacks of Russia, so we tried to mobilize what we can on the sort of the level of the government, simply to sources and equipment, simply to deliver to Ukraine to help them to manage the winter. And finally now, still, so we have a technocratic government. I'm very happy that this government simply will continue in everything what was already agreed by the Heger government, they will continue in this policy, but we should not expect some measures of the political upgrades or whatever, because it is a technocratic government to rule the country till the early parliamentary elections. So this is what we did. And here, yes, frankly speaking, when it comes to the European integration and those 8 agreements, these are very technical agreements. Mostly, I was surprised when we formed 8 working groups. I was coordinating Slovak side. It was 15 agencies, like 7 core ministries, and then 8 regulatory agencies. And on the Ukrainian side, there were representatives of ministries. And then from the first meeting of this group, it was clear for me that Ukrainians need to develop institutions, because it's mostly about the regulatory policies that should be done by independent institutions established by law, not by political will of some governments, whatever. So, and this is really the institution building as a part of the European integration process will be a key, task. And here I think Slovakia can assist Ukraine and help, on the governmental level, but also on non-governmental. And final word, I would say, our idea was to initiate something, even something bigger in terms of international support for Ukraine when it comes to the support for European integration, and especially starting to work with those willing governments. So we have like the club, I would say, 10 governments that they are clearly on that. Can you imagine 10 governments working with Ukrainian government? You have like 30 chapters of the accession agreement. So if there would be agreement of the division of labor, okay, Slovaks will take over 2-3 chapters, Poles, whatever, etc. So we could, Ukraine in technical terms, it would manage simply to conclude and to close those chapters within 3-4 years. But this was the idea. Unfortunately, it's now, it was dream, but simply we cannot continue because of the political situation in Slovakia we have.
Okay, but the question is, Oleksandra, back to you, because as you said, I liked your remark in the beginning that everything is happening at once, so to say. Like it's a mess, and also this debate becomes a little mess because it probably reflects, and we are trying to catch up with the situations. But anyway, the question is, Sasha and Oleksandra was talking about these sectoral things, technical, basically very technical platforms of negotiations. But my question is, and I am fond of your initiative and your view of priorities. The issue of justice is on the table during that, on how not to lose that issue on the table, how not to swipe out that issue from the table under the pressure of all these technical, political problems which must be dealt with in a formal way. So what do you think? Like, what to do that we will not lose sight over what's really important, as you said, and the most important thing is justice.
Is it a question for me? I'm sorry.
Yes, it's for you.
I'm sorry. When we speak about justice, we speak not just about justice for Ukrainians. We speak about a prevention of Russia to attack next countries. Because all this hell which we now face in Ukraine is a result of total impunity which Russians enjoyed for decades in Chechnya, in Moldova, in Georgia, in Mali, in Syria, in Libya, in other countries of the world. And they have never been punished. Russians believe they can do whatever they want. We must break the circle of impunity. And it means that justice is preconditions to peace in our part of the region, where Russia, for decades, used the war as a tool how to achieve their geopolitical interests, and for decades uses war crimes as the methods how to win this war.
is this? Do you think, Martin? Maybe it's for you that because you were talking about this, we need to reform UN. You know, we need to reform UN for 70 years or maybe 100 years. This debate is ongoing and it never ends, and Russia will always stick and will be stuck in that Security Council forever, and etc. Here, Oleksandra is raising this issue. It's not only about Ukraine. It's about all the countries that before and that will come after. So this is like there is something much bigger that we need to deal with than just these technical things. And the Ukraine is just kind of a symbol now, but we are dealing with a much bigger problems. Do you think this is realistic?
Well, it has to be. It has to be because Ukraine is not a symbol; it's a center. It's a center of where the history is being written right now. And depending on how this story will be written, the rest of the world will develop. Depending on the outcome of this war, China will look at Taiwan. Depending on the outcome of this war, other places in the world will either make their problems worse or better. Just look at Nahorny Karabakh. I mean, who would have said that they will solve this problem, Armenia and Azerbaijan, after so many years fighting over it? But when they see how the rest of the world is behaving, they probably came to a conclusion it's better to solve it now than to let it outgrow the type of problem that it was before. So I think that both sides of this story need to be taken into consideration. The first one, that is like the future of the Western world and the international environment, will need to adapt to the outcome of this war in some way, hopefully in a way that will make world better and more peaceful than it is now, because so far we're not heading there. But also on the level of Ukraine, a lot of things needs to be changed. I remember very clearly, I was listening, we invited the former boss of MI6 from Great Britain to Kiev. And then he has his own podcast, it's called One Decision, and he said, after I visited Kiev, I cannot imagine, Ukraine after this war just hanging in the middle between Russia and the rest of the world. It has the strongest, the most prepared army and huge structural problems in society with trauma. And then Ivo Dalder, a very well-known analyst, said, we need to give, and he was at the trip in Kiev as well with Glubokij, he said, we need to give security guarantees to Kiev, because if we don't, Kiev will bring its own. And it will become nuclear. So do we want to have a nuclear superpower with the best army in the world in between the European Union, NATO, and Russia? Probably not. So again, when we are coming back to the same question, how can we help? And I'm coming back to the issue why Glubokij started an office in Kiev. First, we need to listen very carefully. We need to listen very carefully. What are the needs of the Ukrainians? What do they actually need? And then we need to start talking about how we can help. Because we are living in this avatar syndrome, like in the movie, where the wise white man comes in between the savages and tell them how to rule their world. But this is not what needs to happen in Ukraine. They don't need, to take other patterns or ways of governing. In some ways they are already better. In digital, they are much more digitalized society than Slovakia or many other countries in Europe. We need to learn from them how to digitalize, not tell them how to do it. When it comes to army procurement, from prototype on a paper to the battlefield, thanks to initiative like Brave One initiative in Kiev, things are happening in 2 months. I mean, when we brought American and British generals and they saw this with their own eyes, they could not believe, because in the United States or in Great Britain it takes 5-6 years from prototype to the battlefield. But the world is behaving so fast and changing so fast that we cannot function like this anymore. And it brings me back to the one very essential topic. We are not here to help Ukraine. We are here to partner up with them and take all the pain, all the blood, all the tears, everything, all the trauma, all the trust in values that we already forgot that they are ours, and change together. That's the way forward. If we keep switching from we helping them, they taking from us, we will never break this vicious circle.
As Sasha and Alexandra said, people in Spain, in Portugal, in Paris, they don't care. You go to Paris now, you go to London, and there you don't see Ukrainian flag. They don't care. They basically are slowly forgetting about there is some war in East Europe. Maybe
this is not true, actually.
I am maybe too harsh, but definitely they are living with their. What I have in mind is that this proximity and the strategic position. Sorry, Paolo. The proximity of Slovakia and the geographical position of Slovakia is the reason why we should do this grassroots, authentic partnership with Ukrainians, because we understand each other, we are close to each other. Therefore, we are the ones who must do that. You know, it's very natural, Michailo.
Well, I think there is another really important thing about Slovakia and people in Slovakia. Well, at least from my experience, that people in Slovakia don't have any imperial view on Ukraine. Whenever we've been doing, I don't know, I might be wrong, but it comes from my experience. When we've been building projects together with Slovak organizations, it struck me that they actually were treating us, like equals. We are doing projects together. They haven't, like some other countries, even in the regions, they would teach you, like, these are some barbaric people from the East. We need to explain them everything. But when we work with people from Slovakia, they absolutely understand again the capacity of Ukrainian organizations, and we have this really equal partnerships between each other. I think it's this position is quite unique, to be honest, and something that gives a lot of possibilities for these cooperations.
Okay, so we are slowly coming to an end. We still have like 20 minutes, and I want to raise some questions. So my maybe pre-final. How would you conclude? Any one of you, Alexandra or you guys here, when I said that Ukraine is our new destiny, I mean Slovak NGO, Slovak civic society, Slovak politics of Slovak Republic, because it seems so that by now we gained a brand new reputation in Ukraine because of the help, that there is that we have some leverage, and these issues and these things they used to last for decades. People remember such things for generations. So how should we fulfill this proclamation, which is still now proclaimed, that Ukraine is our destiny? What should be, like, where should we start? Like, what should be done? Martin, you said that we need to listen. Okay, try to be more practical. So, any one of you.
Well, if I should start, like many times before in history, we will win, but it depends on which side. Because again, Slovakia is fighting on both sides of the front line right now. And like you said, Ukraine is our destiny, so the winning side will define the future of Slovakia. That's why we cannot let the Russians win, because we will go where the Russian occupied territories are right now, if not materially, then politically and mentally. And if you want something concrete, we should not give up. This is something that I've learned in Kiev. They have been through so much and it didn't break them, that we shouldn't, just sit there and make conferences about civic sector. We need to go out and talk to people. We need to tell them, that this is not over, that the fight is not over, that we are actually in war, and part of this war will be the elections in September. And if we want to prevail, if we want to be part of the civilized world, and Slovakia right now is in the front line of what does it mean to be civilized, then we need to win these elections.
Sasha?
I would say that, the outcome of this war will simply have a direct impact of our lives, maybe our generation. So it's really at the stake is the freedom, values you believe that this is a good and this is a sort of the bad. So this is very important, and we do not have other options. Simply, we need to support Ukraine. It's about Slovakia. It's not the Ukrainian war. It's our war. And at the same time, I see an enormous, potential, how to improve. So I would formulate that so let's help Ukraine to rebuild Ukraine. So rebuilding Ukraine, let's rebuild Slovakia.
Right.
So it's a mutual process. It's not just that we will share something with them, but we will share together, and it will change Slovakia. It will change Slovakia anyway. And I do believe so that we'll be successful together with Ukrainians. Nuremberg Tribunal became possible because Germany lost war, Nazi Germany, and it was occupied. And then it was possible simply to punish all those, war criminals who, bear the responsibility for atrocities. I do not think that we are going to that end. I do not think that we will, or Ukraine or whatever, other country will occupy Russia and establish international sort of the court of justice to punish all the war criminals. It will be much more difficult. So therefore, the last note here I would like to stress, because having some experience with Ukraine and also partners and colleagues, and even from the government, from non-governmental also the structures, EU is very complex structure, and it's rather fragile. And so it's also very important for Ukrainians to know and understand this very complex structure. You have 27 nations with different preferences, different governments, interests, I would say. And this is a unique project in the history, because still we are working in a unity, and we manage the mechanism. Legalistic, yes, very legalistic and very sort of formal procedures, but those procedures, so they are functional because they help us simply to achieve the consensus and so the decisions. And let's be very very cautious about this project. I think it's not the interest of Ukraine to lose it. And now the EU cannot lose Ukraine, because Ukraine is a part of the European project. It's a clear. Now we need to manage the process. So the project is a functional. It will be not easy process. And this is another dimension I would see the role of the civil society, and especially those think tanks, because we didn't start even debate on the reform of the EU. And the European integration of Ukraine simply needs the reform of the European Union, not only in institutional terms, but also in terms of reform of the budget, So this is another issue. I think what I see, I finish by that, saying I see two areas where the civil society should play an important role in order to help the governments to manage that. The first is a real debate about the recovery plan for Ukraine. And one of those 24 areas, European integration. So all the NGOs could, find their role there and establish contacts with Ukrainians, work with them. And finally, what we need to start here, and it's first of all on us, is to debate on the reform of the European Union. Because it is not in capacity in the current present shape to absorb Ukraine. Let's be frank. Therefore, also my the appeal goes to our Ukrainian partners. So you need the EU, and you will be part of the EU. But let's work with the EU in a way so that you will not damage the project, because it's very, very fragile.
Oleksandra, maybe the final word from you to when you hear that from Alexander Duleba. Is that something that you cope with when you look at the current political ops?
Maybe I will respond to this question in such way. When large-scale invasion started, the civilized world told, let's help Ukraine not to lose. And Ukraine started to receive a first weapon to be able to defend ourselves, and first serious sanctions against Russia were introduced into force. But it's time to change this narrative to another one. Let's help Ukraine to win fast.
Right.
Because there is a huge difference between let's help Ukraine not to lose and let's help Ukraine to win fast. And I'm very grateful for all people in Slovak people and other people in different countries who help us to change this narrative now. Because the world needs success of Ukraine. Success of Ukraine and Ukrainian victory will provide a chance for democratic future of Russia itself, and send a strong signal to a lot of countries in the world, in different parts of the world, where people's now also fighting for their freedoms and for their human dignity in very difficult circumstances, while the space of freedom shrinking to the size of a prison cell. So Ukrainian victory is very essential.
Any questions from the audience now?
Hello, I'm Peter Medved. My question is a bit specific on the hybrid wars. Slovakia is already under the war, if not open. The conflict is obviously in here. The feelings of the atmosphere and also public opinion polls are suggesting that we are kind of losing it. And my question is to Ukrainian panelists if they have any points or ideas on the things that we could maybe already start to cooperate from now in this battle which is ahead of us till the autumn to work together in this front.
Maybe Michailo, because you are based here, so
Yeah, the thing is that this is the topic that we have been working with for quite a long time, especially coming from Donetsk, and then working on Ukrainian controlled territories of Donetsk and Lugansk region, especially fighting informational war or the narratives that are injected by Russia into the Ukrainian community, for example, to build these internal tensions and stuff like this. And of course, it requires a lot of work, especially coming from cultural sector, coming from educational sector, coming from media sector. But at the end, all these efforts are paying out. For example, if you see region of the Donetsk and Lugansk region before full-scale invasion, and if you are talking about Ukrainian controlled territories, you'll see that for last how many, 9 years, there had been a huge growth of civil society, of different cultural organizations that felt their responsibility for people living in their communities. And these are local people who started their own projects, their own NGOs, their own work to develop their own communities and to show them, how the life looks like, how to fight informational warfare, how to fight disinformation, what are the values of Ukraine, what are the values of European Union. So I think from that perspective, we have a lot of things to share and to show how this work is done. And for example, this from February to March, we organized the big series of events, let's say, in 7 countries, neighboring Ukraine, not all of them neighboring, but mostly neighboring Ukraine, called Ukrainian Months in Europe. Some events actually took place here in Nova, maybe you were a part of them, I don't know, but some of them took place also in Trnava, but there were also events in Poland, in Czech Republic, in Latvia, in Georgia, where we asked people to talk about how the war changed their communities. And this discussion, dialogue, I think it's really important to understand what's going on in Slovak society as well, and how to talk to people that are poisoned by propaganda or by false narratives.
Maybe it comes to my mind that, of course, there is a lot of reports on news coming from the Ukraine, from the front, but basically there is not so often a voice of Ukrainian people here. It's quite striking fact that because we had some refugee crisis in 2015 and there were about 50 Syrian people coming to Slovakia, and the political agenda was like, this is going to collapse the whole state. And now we have about 115,000 Ukrainians who came here, and basically nobody noticed anything, and media don't report where are these people? They have to live in some flats, they have to work, but we basically don't see them, which is maybe partly my answer to your question, Peter, that we really don't know about. Good point is that we see that this Slovak society can absorb hundreds of thousands of people and nobody notices it, but the bad side of the story is that we basically oversee them and they are not present in the public discourse. There is no public images of Ukrainian, of successful Ukrainians, unsuccessful, whatever. So maybe this could be one good tip.
I think this is the same type of ignorance that you showed with the London story. This is not true. I mean, we have news in Ukrainian at Teatri. We have podcasts about the life of Ukrainians that are quite popular. We have stories in mainstream media about how they work, what they do. I think, when you think of the percentage of how much these people there are in the Slovak society, and then about the possibility of population to actually still absorbs anything from media, it's enough. It's well represented, but it's hard to, like with normal news, it's just hard to reach people. So I don't agree with what you said that we are overlooking them. I think that when there is something to report, it comes to the media. There are already enough people working with the community, talking with them, specialized people who go around Slovakia and ask for the stories and ask for the news. So I wouldn't agree that this is happening, but it might create this kind of selective ignorance, because there might be part of the medial sphere in which it is absolutely not present, and that is something we need to touch. that people who are not looking for the kind of stories, people who are not willingly absorbing that this is the way that the Slovak society has changed, should be also in some sort of confrontation with 1,050,000 new people in the Slovak society. But if the Slovak society is so well developed that we actually recognized Vietnamese as a new minority, I think that in this way, actually the Slovak society is behaving very well.
Okay, I would like to add one remark to that. It's maybe, it's not a problem of Ukrainians coming to Slovakia, whatever, not a problem of migrants, I mean, why these Russian narratives are so sort of successful, and spread in Slovakia is because a cultural code of protest. Cultural code of protest, because the voters in the United States who vote for Trump, those protests, so the cultural, so the code is, okay, let's go back to fundamentals of America, white men, whatever. This is the cultural code. In Slovakia, if people go to shop and see increased, the price on eggs, they say, I'm for Putin. So this is other problem. It's not a problem with Ukrainians. It's our domestic, Slovak problem. And why the shape of the cultural code of political protest we have, that is like pro-authoritarian, and like in this situation, Putin would be there, other sort of the, guy like Putin or other countries, so it would be him or her. So this is the problem, and I hope that this word also will, help to treat Slovakia as a patient, with this is a diagnosis of Slovaks. But this is a different debate, having nothing with sort of Ukrainians. It should be done by us here in Slovakia. So this is our diagnosis, I would say, of our idiotism. But
okay, the last question.
My name is Andrej from the League for Mental Health in Slovakia, and we hire almost 200 Ukrainian staff who provide mental health, psychosocial support to other Ukrainians, and the stories are all there. What they really want is not to be talked about, really, because they want to be part of the society. That's what they really want. But I'm thankful to Martin that he actually mentioned mental health. That's our experience with the Globsa conference. That actually, how can we talk about recovery of society without talking about the recovery of mental health, with such an immense amount and volume of trauma that is generated through this terrible war, that will have a long-lasting effect on other countries, including Slovakia. And what our experts displaced from Ukraine are saying that, of course, the people displaced from Ukraine bring the war to other countries in their heads all the time, because they have to face the mental health challenges. So thanks for that. Thanks for that. And this debate made me realize that maybe one of the projects we can do is actually to spread our services into Ukraine, at least into the western parts, because we've learned a lot about what is needed. It's not only about psychiatrists, it's about community services. And if we want to really resolve the problem of the hybrid war and of the cultural problems, I don't think there's any better way than actually to create real relationships between the communities. Because you cannot say that Ukrainians are this way or that way if you actually know a real Ukrainian. It's very hard to do that, and vice versa. So that was not a question, just a remark.
Very nice remark, thank you. A closing remark, basically. Alexandra, sorry. So, I thought you want to add something. Anyway, I would say this is it. Thank you, Oleksandra, for joining us on this event. We are very helpful and thankful for that, and we wish you all the best. And I hope to see you someday in Kiev, maybe in Bratislava, anyway around. Thanks to Alexander Duleba, Michailo Glubokij, and Martin Poliačik for excellent insights and analysis, and thank you here, the audience, for listening to us. Good night and good luck.